9-year-old Ethan darted through the door, his sneakers scuffing the freshly polished wooden floor. His face glowed with excitement, his bright blue eyes wide as he called out, "Mom! Mom! You won't believe what happened today!" Emma, Ethan's mother, was in the kitchen, her auburn hair pulled into a messy bun as she wiped down the countertops. She glanced up from her cleaning, smiling at her son's exuberance. "What is it, sweetheart? Did you make a new friend?" she asked, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Better than that," Ethan exclaimed, dropping his backpack with a thud. "I think I found my twin." Emma chuckled, brushing off his claim as she knelt to help him untie his shoelaces. "Your twin, huh? That's a big discovery for your first day at school. What makes you think that?" Ethan's words tumbled out in a rush. "His name is Liam, and he looks just like me. Same hair, same eyes, even the same smile. And guess what? He's the same height, too. Mom, I'm telling you, we're twins." Emma's laughter softened into a gentle smile as she brushed a strand of hair from Ethan's face. "Sweetheart, sometimes people just look alike. That doesn't mean you're twins. Maybe you've found a great new friend." But Ethan wasn't having it. He crossed his arms, his brow furrowed with determination. "No, Mom, you don't understand. It's not just that we look alike, it's everything. He even likes the same stuff as me, Star Wars, Legos, and chocolate chip cookies. You have to meet him, and then you'll see." Emma ruffled Ethan's hair affectionately. All right, I'm sure he's a lovely boy, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. You've got dinner to eat and homework to finish, remember?" Ethan sighed dramatically, but he couldn't hide the spark of excitement in his eyes. "Okay, but you'll see, Mom. You'll see." Later that evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Ethan couldn't hold back his excitement any longer. Between bites of spaghetti, he turned to his father, Daniel, and announced, "Dad, I found my twin today." Daniel, a tall man with a calm demeanor, paused mid-bite, his fork hovering over his plate. He exchanged a quick glance with Emma before putting his fork down. "Your twin, huh?" he said, his tone light but curious. "What's this all about?" Ethan launched into his explanation with gusto, recounting every detail about Liam, his looks, his interests, and how they'd immediately clicked. As Ethan spoke, Emma watched Daniel's reaction closely. At first he smiled and nodded along, but as the story unfolded, a shadow seemed to cross his face. He shifted in his seat, his hand tightening slightly around his glass. When Ethan finished, Daniel cleared his throat, his voice carefully controlled. "That's quite a coincidence, buddy, but, I'm sure Liam's just someone who looks a lot like you. Happens all the time." Ethan frowned. "But, Dad, it's not just how he looks, it's everything. You should see him, you'll know we're twins." Daniel forced a chuckle, shaking his head. "Ethan, I think your imagination's just running wild. It's great that you've made a new friend, though." Emma noticed the tension in Daniel's voice, the way he avoided making eye contact. She felt a flicker of doubt, a subtle tug at her instincts. Something about his reaction felt off. Ethan looked down at his plate, his earlier enthusiasm deflating. "You don't believe me either," he muttered. Emma reached across the table to squeeze Ethan's hand. "Hey, it's not that we don't believe you, sweetie. It's just twins are a big thing to claim. But how about this? Maybe I'll meet Liam's mom sometime soon. Would that make you feel better?" Ethan brightened a little at the suggestion. "Yeah, you'll see, Mom. You'll see." That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Emma found Daniel in the living room, staring out the window with a distant look in his eyes. She approached him quietly, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Daniel," she began, her voice soft, "is everything okay? You seemed tense at dinner." Daniel turned to her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I'm fine, Emma. Just a long day at work, that's all." But Emma wasn't convinced. She studied his face, noting the tightness in his jaw and the way he avoided her gaze. She wanted to press further, to ask if he knew something she didn't. But instead, she let it go, deciding not to push him. Not yet. As they climbed into bed that night, Ethan's words echoed in Emma's mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a child's imagination. Whatever the truth was, she had a sense it would change everything. The next morning, Emma stood at the kitchen counter, sipping her coffee as sunlight streamed through the window. Despite the warmth of the golden rays, she couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her since last night's dinner. Ethan's excitement about Liam was natural. He was a curious boy with a vivid imagination. But Daniel's reaction had been anything but ordinary. Emma replayed the scene in her mind. The way Daniel had stiffened, the tension in his voice, the quick deflection. He was usually so calm, so steady, but last night something had rattled him. The thought nagged at her like an itch she couldn't scratch. "Morning, Mom!" Ethan's cheerful voice broke through her thoughts. He bounded into the kitchen, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Can I take some extra cookies today? Liam said he loves chocolate chip and I want to share." Emma smiled at her son's generosity, though her stomach knotted at the mention of Liam. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, handing him a small container. "But don't let that be your whole lunch, okay?" "I won't," Ethan promised, snatching the cookies and heading for the door. "Bye, Mom. Love you." "Love you too, buddy," she called after him, watching as he ran down the driveway to catch the school bus. Emma stood by the window, staring out long after the bus disappeared down the street. The house was silent now, but her thoughts were anything but. The way Ethan had described Liam, his looks, his interests, even his voice, it was uncanny. Could it really be just a coincidence? Or was there more to the story than Daniel was letting on? That evening, the family sat down for dinner as usual. The scent of roast chicken and mashed potatoes filled the dining room, but Emma barely tasted her food. She watched Daniel closely, waiting for the right moment to bring up Ethan's twin again. "So," Ethan began, his mouth full of mashed potatoes, "I told Liam about our dog, Max. He said he has a dog too, and guess what? His dog is a golden retriever too. Isn't that crazy?" Emma glanced at Daniel, whose fork froze mid-air for a split second before he quickly resumed eating. "That's quite the coincidence," Daniel said, his tone carefully neutral. "It sounds like you and Liam have a lot in common." "We do," Ethan exclaimed. "It's because we're twins, Dad, I told you." Daniel forced a chuckle, but Emma could see the tension in his jaw. "Ethan, we've talked about this. It's great that you and Liam get along, but you're not twins. Sometimes people just look alike." "But Dad—" "That's enough, Ethan," Daniel said, a little too sharply. Ethan's shoulders slumped, and he stared down at his plate, poking at his chicken with his fork. Emma's heart ached for her son. She reached over to touch his hand. "It's okay to be excited about your new friend, Ethan," she said gently. "Maybe one day we can invite Liam over for dinner." Ethan brightened slightly at that, but Daniel's reaction didn't go unnoticed. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding Emma's gaze. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Emma found Daniel in the living room, nursing a glass of whiskey. The TV was on, but his eyes were unfocused, staring past the screen. "Daniel," Emma said softly as she sat down beside him. "Can we talk?" He didn't look at her. "About what?" "About Ethan," she pressed. "And Liam. And why you've been acting so strange about all of this." Daniel sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Emma, it's nothing. You're reading too much into it." "No," she said firmly. "I know you, Daniel. Something is bothering you. And it's not just that Ethan is excited about a new friend." "What is it?" Daniel finally turned to her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. Guilt? Fear? "Emma, you're overthinking this. Ethan has a vivid imagination. That's all there is to it." But Emma wasn't convinced. She leaned closer, her voice soft but insistent. "Daniel, if there's something you're not telling me, I need to know. Ethan deserves the truth. And so do I." Daniel looked away, his jaw tightening. "There's nothing to tell," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Emma stared at him, her heart sinking. She wanted to believe him, but the doubt was too strong. Something about Liam, about Ethan's resemblance to him, was unsettling Daniel. And until he came clean, Emma knew she couldn't rest. As she climbed into bed that night, Emma stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. What was Daniel hiding? And why did she feel like discovering the truth would change everything? The morning sun bathed Ethan's room in a soft glow as he jumped out of bed, brimming with excitement. It was picture day at school, and for Ethan, it wasn't just about capturing a memory. It was about proving a point. He hurried through his morning routine, carefully combing his dark hair to perfection. "Mom, do you think I should wear my blue shirt or the green one?" he called down the hall. Emma peeked into his room, holding a steaming mug of coffee. I think the blue one really brings out your eyes," she said with a smile. Ethan nodded, grabbing the shirt. "Thanks, Mom. Today's going to be great. I just know it." Emma chuckled at his enthusiasm, though a pang of worry lingered in her chest. She hadn't been able to shake the tension from the previous evening's conversation with Daniel. What was he hiding? And why did it feel like Ethan's twin wasn't just a child's flight of fancy? At school, the air buzzed with excitement as students filed into the gym for their class photos. Teachers hustled to line up the children, straighten collars, and tame rogue strands of hair. Ethan spotted Liam across the room, adjusting his sweater. "Liam," he called, weaving through the crowd to reach his friend. Liam turned, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Hey, Ethan, are you ready for this?" "Totally," Ethan said. "Remember our plan? We have to stand next to each other for the photo." Liam nodded, his excitement matching Ethan's. "Let's do it." Their teacher, Mrs. Harper, approached, clipboard in hand. "All right, everyone, line up by height," she instructed, waving the children into place. Ethan and Liam exchanged a quick glance before stepping into the line together. Their similar builds made it easy to stand side by side without drawing attention. As Mrs. Harper moved down the line, she paused, her eyes flicking between the two boys. "Well," she said with a bemused smile, "you two could be twins." Ethan beamed. "That's what we've been saying." Mrs. Harper chuckled. "All right, you can stay together. Just remember to smile." The boys nodded eagerly, their excitement barely contained. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the second row, each straightening up as the photographer adjusted his camera. The photographer, a cheerful man with a thick mustache, peered through the lens. He paused, lowering the camera to study the lineup. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "You two boys in the middle. Are you brothers?" Ethan grinned. "Not yet, but we might be." The photographer laughed, shaking his head. "All right, everyone, big smiles. 3, 2, 1, say cheese." The camera flashed, capturing the moment Ethan and Liam had been waiting for. As the photographer reviewed the shot on his digital screen, he nodded in satisfaction. "Perfect. Next group." Ethan and Liam high-fived as they stepped out of the lineup. "We did it," Ethan whispered. "Yeah," Liam agreed. "Now our parents have to believe us." That afternoon, Ethan rushed off the school bus, clutching an envelope with the class photo inside. His backpack bounced on his shoulders as he burst through the front door. Mom, you have to see this." Emma appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "What is it, sweetheart?" Ethan thrust the envelope toward her, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. "The class photo! Look at me and Liam!" Emma took the envelope and pulled out the glossy print. Her eyes immediately landed on Ethan and Liam, standing side by side in the second row. Her breath caught in her throat. They were identical. The same dark hair, the same bright green eyes, the same dimpled smile. Even their postures mirrored each other as if they were two halves of the same whole. "Oh my goodness," Emma whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. She stared at the photo, her mind racing. Could this really be a coincidence? Ethan grinned triumphantly. "See? I told you, Mom. We're twins." Emma sank onto the couch, still clutching the photo. "Ethan, I don't know what to say. You and Liam, you really do look alike." "So you believe me now?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with hope. Emma hesitated, torn between the undeniable evidence in her hands and the logical part of her brain that insisted there had to be a rational explanation. "I think there's definitely something we need to look into," she said finally. "Ethan, would you mind if I talk to Liam's mom about this?" Ethan's face lit up. "That's a great idea, Mom. She'll tell you I'm not making it up." That evening, Emma sat in the living room staring at the photo while Ethan played in his room. When Daniel walked in, loosening his tie after a long day at work, he paused, noticing her troubled expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting beside her. Emma handed him the photo without a word. Daniel studied it, his brow furrowing. When his eyes landed on Ethan and Liam, his face went pale. "Emma," he began, his voice low. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Emma said slowly, "that Ethan might be right. He and Liam, they look like twins, Daniel. This can't just be a coincidence." Daniel set the photo down, rubbing his temples. "You're jumping to conclusions." "Am I?" Emma shot back. "Because Ethan has been saying this for days. And now I'm starting to think he might be onto something. And the way you've been acting, Daniel, it's like you know something you're not telling me." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're letting your imagination run wild." "Maybe," Emma said, her voice firm. "But I'm going to find out. I'm meeting Liam's mother tomorrow." Daniel's head snapped up. "You're what?" "I need answers, Daniel, and if you won't give them to me, I'll find them myself." Daniel stared at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he stood and left the room without another word. Emma watched him go, her resolve hardening. Whatever secrets Daniel was keeping, she was determined to uncover the truth for Ethan's sake and for her own. The following morning, Emma woke with a mixture of determination and nervous energy coursing through her veins. She glanced over at Daniel, who was still asleep, his face lined with tension even in rest. The weight of his evasiveness the night before hung heavy in the air. Emma shook her head, her resolve strengthening. If Daniel wouldn't tell her the truth, she'd find it on her own. She got dressed quickly and made breakfast for Ethan before dropping him off at school. "Be good today, sweetheart," she said, leaning down to kiss his cheek. Ethan grinned, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "I will. Say hi to Liam's mom for me, okay?" Emma gave him a small smile, her heart tightening. "I will, honey. Have a great day." As she watched Ethan run toward the school building, his exuberance palpable, Emma's nerves began to creep in. What if she was wrong? What if this meeting with Liam's mother turned out to be nothing more than an awkward encounter over a simple coincidence? She pushed the thoughts aside, knowing she couldn't live with herself if she didn't follow through. The cafe was warm and inviting, its air filled with the comforting aroma of coffee and baked goods. Emma arrived a few minutes early, choosing a small table by the window where she could keep an eye out for Claire. She sipped her latte, her heart thudding as she glanced at her watch. 9:58 a.m. 2 minutes to go. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door opened and a woman with curly auburn hair stepped inside, scanning the room nervously. Emma stood and waved, catching her attention. "You must be Claire," Emma said, extending her hand. Claire nodded, her smile tentative. "And you're Emma? It's nice to meet you." The two women sat down, exchanging polite pleasantries. Emma noticed Claire's hands trembling slightly as she picked up her coffee cup. "So," Claire began, her voice soft, "Liam told me about Ethan. He's been talking about him nonstop. Honestly, I didn't know what to make of it at first." Emma nodded, her own hands fidgeting with her cup. "Ethan's been the same. He's so convinced that they're twins. At first I thought it was just his imagination, but then I saw the class photo." Claire's eyes widened slightly. "It's uncanny, isn't it?" Emma pulled the picture out of her bag and placed it on the table. Claire leaned in, her breath catching as she studied the image. "They're identical," she whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I thought the same thing," Emma said. "That's why I needed to meet you. I had to see if you knew anything about this." Claire sat back, her expression conflicted. "I don't know much, to be honest. Liam was adopted when he was just a few days old. The agency didn't provide much information about his birth parents." Emma froze, her heart skipping a beat. "Adopted?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire nodded. "Yes. They said it was a closed adoption, so I've never been able to learn anything more. But when I look at this photo, it's like staring at a mirror. Emma's mind raced, her throat tightened as pieces of a puzzle she hadn't realized existed began to fit together. Daniel's odd behavior, his refusal to discuss Ethan's birth, and now this. "Claire," Emma said slowly, "I need to ask you something. Do you have any records from Liam's adoption? Anything that might tell us where he came from?" Claire hesitated, biting her lip. "I think I have some paperwork at home. It's not much, but you're welcome to look at it." Emma nodded, her pulse quickening. "Thank you, I think there's more to this story than we realize." Later that afternoon, Emma sat in Claire's living room, a stack of papers spread out on the coffee table between them. The boys were still at school, giving the women time to sift through the documents in peace. "Here," Claire said, pulling out a faded envelope. "This is all the agency gave me." Emma took the envelope, her hands trembling. She opened it carefully, pulling out a few sheets of paper. Her eyes scanned the text, her heart sinking as she realized how little information there was. Most of it was generic legal jargon, but one line caught her attention. "Birthplace, Greenridge General Hospital," Emma read aloud, her voice shaking. Claire frowned. "That's here in town, isn't it?" Emma nodded slowly. "That's where Ethan was born, too." The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them. Emma's mind reeled. If Liam and Ethan were both born at Greenridge General and Liam was adopted shortly after birth, could it really be a coincidence? "We need to dig deeper," Emma said finally. "There has to be more to this." Claire nodded, her expression resolute. "Agreed, but where do we start?" Emma hesitated, then said, "I think I need to confront my husband. He's been acting strange ever since Ethan mentioned Liam. If anyone knows the truth about Ethan's birth, it's him." Claire reached across the table, squeezing Emma's hand. "You're brave for doing this, Emma. I hope you get the answers you're looking for." Emma swallowed hard, determination settling in her chest. "So do I." As she drove home, Emma rehearsed the conversation she knew she needed to have with Daniel. Her emotions swirled: anger, fear, hope. But one thing was clear. She couldn't rest until she uncovered the truth. Emma sat in the car outside her house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The faint hum of the engine was the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Her heart pounded in her chest as she replayed her meeting with Claire over and over in her mind. She knew she needed to confront Daniel, but the thought made her stomach churn. Taking a deep breath, she turned off the engine and stepped out of the car. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the driveway, mirroring the darkness that loomed in her thoughts. She pushed open the front door, bracing herself for the conversation that awaited her. Inside, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, his laptop open in front of him and a mug of coffee by his side. He looked up as she entered, smiling faintly. "Hey, you're back. How was your day?" Emma set her bag down on the counter, her hands trembling. "We need to talk, Daniel," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Daniel's smile faded and he straightened in his chair, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What's wrong?" he asked cautiously. Emma took a seat across from him, meeting his gaze. "I went to meet Liam's mother today." Daniel's expression shifted, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. "Oh?" he said, his voice carefully neutral. "They're identical, Daniel," Emma continued, her voice firm. "Ethan and Liam. They look exactly alike. It's not just a coincidence." Daniel's hand tightened around his coffee mug and his jaw clenched. "Emma, kids can look similar. It doesn't mean—" "Stop," Emma interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "Don't do that. Don't dismiss this like you have every time I've tried to talk to you about it. I saw the photo, Daniel. I met Claire. Liam was adopted. And do you know where he was born? Greenridge General, the same hospital where Ethan was born." Daniel's face turned pale and he looked away, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his laptop. "Emma, I don't think—" "Daniel," she said sharply, cutting him off again. "I need the truth. No more excuses, no more lies. I deserve to know what's going on. Ethan deserves to know. Daniel sat silently for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the table. Emma's heart raced as she watched him, her frustration growing with every passing second. Finally, he took a deep breath and looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and pain. "You're right," he said quietly. "You deserve the truth." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure she was ready to hear what he had to say, but she nodded, urging him to continue. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly, running a hand through his hair. "When you were pregnant with Ethan," he began, his voice heavy with emotion, "it was a difficult pregnancy. You were so sick, and the delivery, it didn't go as planned." Emma nodded, her chest tightening at the memory. "I remember," she said softly. "I fainted during labor. I don't remember much after that." Daniel's voice broke as he continued. "Emma, our baby didn't make it. He was stillborn." Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled up in her eyes as the weight of his words sank in. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That can't be true. I held Ethan after he was born." Daniel reached across the table, his eyes pleading. "You were unconscious for hours, Emma. When you woke up, I couldn't tell you. You'd been through so much already. I didn't know how you would handle it." Emma's mind raced, her heart shattering as she pieced together the implications of his confession. Then who is Ethan?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel hesitated, tears streaming down his face. After our baby was gone, I didn't know what to do. I was devastated, but I couldn't stand the thought of you waking up and finding out what had happened. I wanted to protect you." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "I heard about a set of twins who had been born at the same hospital and put up for adoption. I made arrangements. I adopted Ethan. I thought it would help us heal." Emma stared at him, her hands shaking. "You lied to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You kept this from me for 9 years." "I didn't know how to tell you," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "Every time I thought about it, I was terrified of losing you, of losing the life we'd built together." Emma stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You didn't give me a choice, Daniel. You didn't trust me enough to handle the truth. Do you know what that feels like?" "I was trying to protect you," Daniel said desperately, standing as well. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You had no right to make that decision for me. For us. For Ethan." The room fell silent, the weight of Daniel's confession hanging heavy between them. Emma turned and walked toward the living room, needing space to process what she had just learned. "Emma," Daniel called after her, his voice filled with anguish. "Please, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you." She paused in the doorway, her back to him. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this, Daniel," she said softly. "But right now, I need time to think." As she walked away, Emma's mind swirled with conflicting emotions. Anger, betrayal, sadness, but also love for Ethan, the boy who had been her son in every way that mattered. No matter how he came into her life, he was hers. And now she had to figure out what to do next. The following morning dawned gray and overcast, mirroring Emma's turbulent emotions. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. The number of the DNA testing clinic was already dialed. All she needed to do was press call. Her hands trembled as she hesitated. What if the results confirmed what she feared? Could she handle the truth? A small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mom, are we going to see Liam today?" Ethan stood in the doorway, his face hopeful and innocent. Emma forced a smile, her heart clenching at the sight of her son. "Yes, sweetheart," she said gently. "We're going to meet Liam and his mom this morning." Ethan beamed and dashed off to get his jacket. Emma took a deep breath and pressed the call button. An hour later, Emma and Ethan arrived at the clinic where they had arranged to meet Claire and Liam. The waiting room was bright and sterile, filled with the quiet hum of air conditioning. Ethan and Liam ran off to play in the small children's area, their laughter breaking through Emma's anxious thoughts. Claire sat beside her, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "Are you ready for this?" she asked softly. Emma shook her head, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if anyone can be ready for something like this." The nurse called their names and both mothers stood, their steps hesitant. "We'll have the boys' results ready shortly," the nurse said, ushering them into a small consultation room. She handed them a set of forms to sign, explaining the testing process. Emma barely heard her, her thoughts swirling with possibilities. When the nurse left, Emma turned to Claire. "What if it's true?" she whispered. Claire's expression was soft but firm. "Then we'll face it together. Whatever the results are, we'll make it work for the boys." The minutes dragged on as they waited. Emma's heart raced every time she heard footsteps in the hallway. Finally, the door opened, and the nurse entered with a sealed envelope in her hand. "Here are the results," the nurse said, placing the envelope on the table. "Take your time." Emma stared at the envelope as if it were a ticking time bomb. Claire reached out, her hand steady, and picked it up. She looked at Emma. "Should I open it?" Emma nodded, unable to find her voice. Claire carefully tore the envelope open and unfolded the paper inside. Her eyes scanned the document, widening as they reached the bottom. "What does it say?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. Claire handed her the paper, her hand shaking. "It says there's a 99.9% probability they're twins." Emma's breath caught and tears welled up in her eyes. She stared at the results, her mind struggling to process what they confirmed. Ethan and Liam weren't just lookalikes. They were brothers, separated at birth. Back in the waiting room, Ethan and Liam looked up as the mothers returned. "Did they figure it out?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with excitement. Emma knelt in front of him, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Ethan," she began softly, "the results say that you and Liam are twins. You're brothers." Ethan's eyes widened and a huge grin spread across his face. "Really? Liam's my brother?" Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, sweetie. He's your brother." Liam ran over, hugging Ethan tightly. "I knew it," he said triumphantly. "I knew we had to be brothers." The two boys began chattering excitedly, planning all the things they could do together as brothers. Emma and Claire watched them, their hearts full of emotion. Later that evening, back at home, Emma sat in the living room with Daniel. She handed him the DNA results, her expression calm but firm. "They're twins," she said simply. Daniel looked at the paper, his face pale. He took a deep breath, setting it down on the coffee table. "I'm sorry, Emma," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I didn't mean for it to come out this way." "I don't care how it came out," Emma replied. "What matters now is how we move forward. Ethan has a brother, Daniel. He deserves to know him, to have him in his life." Daniel nodded, his shoulders sagging. "You're right," he said quietly. "We'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Emma placed a hand on his. "We'll figure it out, Daniel. For Ethan. For Liam." The next morning, Emma sat down with Ethan at the breakfast table. "Ethan, there's something I want to talk to you about," she said gently. Ethan looked up, his mouth full of cereal. "What is it, Mom?" "I want you to know how much I love you," she began, her voice steady but emotional. "No matter what, you'll always be my son." Ethan frowned. "I know that, Mom. What's wrong?" Emma smiled through her tears. "Nothing's wrong. I just wanted you to know that finding out about Liam doesn't change anything. It just means our family is a little bigger now." Ethan smiled back, his eyes shining. "I'm glad, Mom. I always wanted a brother." Emma pulled him into a hug, holding him close. In that moment, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family. The weekend after the DNA results arrived, Emma and Claire planned a picnic to officially bring their families together. The park was buzzing with the sounds of laughter and children playing, a perfect backdrop for what was sure to be an emotional day. Ethan and Liam had spent every possible moment together since the news, and they were buzzing with excitement about the idea of becoming more than just friends, brothers. Emma and Daniel arrived at the park, carrying a cooler filled with sandwiches, fruit, and drinks. Ethan raced ahead, spotting Liam and Claire already setting up near a large oak tree. He waved frantically, and Liam ran to meet him, the two boys embracing like they'd been separated for years rather than days. Emma watched them, her heart swelling with emotion. She glanced at Daniel, who stood silently beside her. "Ready?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded, his expression both nervous and hopeful. "Let's do this." Under the shade of the oak tree, the families gathered on a large picnic blanket. Claire and Emma exchanged warm smiles as they unpacked the food, while the boys ran off to explore the nearby playground. Daniel and Claire's husband, Tom, shook hands awkwardly, but as they began talking, their shared experiences quickly broke the ice. The conversation among the adults was initially hesitant, but soon laughter and stories filled the air. Emma and Claire marveled at the similarities between Ethan and Liam. Their shared love for dinosaurs, their mutual obsession with building Lego cities, even their identical habit of scrunching their noses when they concentrated. "Do you remember when Liam tried to build that giant T-Rex out of Lego last year?" Claire asked, laughing. Emma nodded, smiling. "Ethan did the same thing. He got frustrated when the tail wouldn't stay on and refused to let me touch it." Claire chuckled. "Sounds exactly like Liam." As the afternoon wore on, the two families felt an easy camaraderie forming, like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. Even Daniel, who had been reserved and cautious, seemed to relax as he watched Ethan and Liam playing together. Later, as the boys were running a race across the open field, Ethan stopped abruptly and turned to Liam. "Hey, do you think we could have a sleepover sometime? Like, every weekend?" Liam's eyes lit up. "Yes! We could build forts and watch movies and stay up all night." Ethan looked at their parents, his face hopeful. "Can we?" Emma exchanged a glance with Claire, who smiled warmly. "I think we can make that happen," Claire said. The boys cheered, high-fiving each other before resuming their race. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, the families gathered their things and began packing up. Before leaving, Ethan and Liam insisted on taking a family photo, this time with everyone included. Claire's husband set up his phone on a nearby bench, using the timer to capture the moment. The two families stood close together, Ethan and Liam right in the center, grinning ear to ear. When the timer beeped, everyone smiled, and the camera captured the start of their new life as an extended family. That evening, back at home, Ethan was still bubbling with excitement. "Mom, can Liam come over tomorrow? I want to show him my new video game." Emma laughed, ruffling his hair. "We'll see, sweetheart. I think Liam needs to spend some time with his mom, too." Ethan pouted but quickly perked up. "Okay, but next weekend it's my turn to go to his house, right?" Emma nodded, her heart full. "We'll work it out, I promise." As she tucked Ethan into bed, she sat beside him for a moment, stroking his hair. "Ethan, I want you to know how proud I am of you." Ethan looked up at her, puzzled. "Why, Mom?" "For being so open-hearted and kind," Emma said. "You've embraced Liam like you've known him forever. That's a really special thing." Ethan grinned sleepily. "Well, he is my brother." Emma kissed his forehead, her chest tightening with love. "Yes, he is, and you're my son always and forever." Ethan's eyes closed, a peaceful smile on his face as he drifted off to sleep. In the living room, Emma found Daniel sitting quietly, a thoughtful expression on his face. She sat beside him, taking his hand. "Today went well, didn't it?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Better than I could have hoped," he admitted. "Seeing the boys together, it makes all of this worth it." Emma squeezed his hand. "We've been through a lot, Daniel. But I think we're going to be okay." Daniel looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Emma, for giving me another chance, for believing in us. Emma smiled softly. We're a family, Daniel. That's what matters. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of play dates, sleepovers, and shared family dinners. Ethan and Liam were inseparable, and their joy was infectious. The bond between the two families grew stronger with each passing day, built on trust, forgiveness, and love. One evening, as the two families gathered for a barbecue in Claire's backyard, Emma watched Ethan and Liam playing tag under the fading sunlight. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that despite the challenges and the pain, they had found something beautiful in the end. Turning to Claire, she raised her glass. To family, she said, her voice steady and full of emotion. To family, Claire echoed, clinking her glass with Emma's. As the night deepened and laughter filled the air, Emma realized that this was just the beginning. A new chapter had opened for both families, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter future. In this new chapter of their lives, two families became one, united by the love of two boys who taught them the meaning of resilience, forgiveness, and hope. And so, Ethan and Liam's story serves as a reminder to us all. No matter where we come from or what we face, love and connection have the power to overcome anything. If you found this story as heartwarming and inspiring as we did, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing tales of resilience, love, and the unexpected twists life has to offer. Click the link below to watch another story that will touch your heart. See you next time.